The holiday season officially starts when you get that first card in the mail. Shutterfly makes it easy to add more meaning to the everyday with hundreds of holiday card designs that can be personalized in seconds with your favorite photos from this year. Select your greeting, customize the color, and even add little extras like personalized foil to make a holiday card that really shines. Enjoy 40% off with code SMILE40 at Shutterfly.com and send something meaningful this year. See site for more details.
The Ford Explorer has what you need for the road ahead. Up to 7 selectable drive modes, a 5,000-pound towing capacity, and an available 400-horsepower engine. The 2025 Ford Explorer. It's all in the name.
When properly equipped, max towing varies based on cargo, vehicle configuration, accessories, and number of passengers. Horsepower, torque, payload, and towing are independent attributes and may not be achieved simultaneously. Horsepower and torque ratings based on premium fuel per SAE J1349 standard. Your results may vary.
This is the sound of your ride home with Dad after he caught you vaping. Awkward, isn't it? Most vapes contain seriously addictive levels of nicotine and disappointment. Know the real cost of vapes. Brought to you by the FDA.
We want to warn you that this podcast contains disturbing content. It's an early morning in People's Park in San Francisco. The park was once associated with peace protests, flower power, and the hippie movement. But now, in 2006, it's mostly a place for...
People's Park in San Francisco was mainly homeless people, in fact.
But besides the homeless and their tents, there was also a man in the park that day. He was fumbling with a large black box connected to a microphone. Inside the box was an amplifier. On the lawn in front of him, about 20 to 30 people had gathered, and 3 girls were walking around, 2 aged about 10 to 12, and 1 who looked to be about 20.
And he would turn up with Alyssa, Angel and Starlight and Nancy, and they would unveil the black box, and he would start playing his guitar and singing his songs while the girls handed out water and sandwiches to the various homeless people, which were like his flock.
Yes, while Philip Garrido, because that's who he is, along with his little family here in People's Park, starts singing, the girls hand out sandwiches and drinks. Perhaps that's why so many people gathered to hear Philip talk about his black box.
And he was telling people that he could communicate with spirits with it, you know? And people would say stuff, and he would go, "Can you hear this? Can you hear this?" And he said, "There's spirits," and everybody could hear that it was other people talking. It wasn't coming from the black box.
No, because the truth is, no one hears any voices from the black box. It's just Philip himself mumbling into the microphone. And it's unclear what exactly this box is supposed to do. On one hand, Philip says it can talk to spirits, but he also claims it can cure schizophrenia, though how is quite, or rather very, hard to understand.
He was kind of like a psycho at that point, very, very eccentric, but he was believed in his black box was going to cure schizophrenia and communicate with God and everything, you know? So a lot of people that a lot of his customers, they tried to get rid of him as fast as possible so they didn't have to have this demonstration, you know. His black box he called God's Voice Revealed. You know, that was going to hear spirits that were going to change the world.
Right, because the homeless people in People's Park aren't the only ones Philip has shown his black box to. Many of his customers also received a lecture, and not just one, but many times.
Yeah, he would come in here and he was just rambling.
This is Tim Allen from East County Glass and Window Company, a business that bought printed materials from Print for
I would tell the girls, hey, when you see Philip come in, tell him I'm not here.
But the black box is just one part of Philip's, what can we call it? His radicalization, perhaps, during this period. He also becomes more and more interested in God, an interest he's had for a long time, but it strengthens in the early 2000s. Here we hear from another one of his customers, Jim Molino, who bought printed materials for many years and is interviewed on CBS.
He seemed to be a little eccentric sometime, and because he would avidly speak about God and the Bible to everybody.
Garrido started his own church in his backyard. He set up a tent and he named it the God's Desire Church, and he also started a blog about it.
Yes, it goes so far that Philip Garrido starts his own church, God's Desire Church, and a blog, since this is the mid-2000s, where he writes long posts. He also posts a manifesto where he writes about how he's a convicted sex offender who has, quote, cured himself, unquote, and even cured his schizophrenia, which he had suffered from for many years. And now he has found God and started a church.
And he would hold services, with Nancy, Alyssa, Angel and Starlight, and invite different neighbors or whatever to hear him preach. And he was convinced that the church was going to take off. And with his black box demonstrations, it was all part of his plan. He's like totally crazy by this time,
And yet no one really sees the seriousness of this. It will be several more years before Philip Garrido's escalating madness becomes known to the rest of the world. But when it does, it will be in a big way. You are listening to Girl Missing, a 6-part series about the kidnapping of Jaycee Dugard and what can happen when too many turn a blind eye to madness. I'm your host, Jonathan Rollins. If you like what you hear, don't forget to follow Crime by PodLit so you can find previous series and also see when we release the next chapter. This is the 5th chapter, Female Intuition. On June 10th, 2001, it's been 10 years since Jaycee Dugard was kidnapped in South Lake Tahoe. Neither her mother, Terry, nor her stepfather, Carl, still live there. But as usual, a memorial is held on the anniversary, and 100 people march through town with pink ribbons to keep Jaycee's memory alive. The principal of Jaycee's old school, Myers Elementary School, Karen Gillis Tinlin, walks in the parade alongside Terry, who has returned to South Lake Tahoe for the anniversary. She's interviewed in the documentary Captive for 18 years.
The 10-year anniversary walk that we did, I walked with Jaycee's mom, and part of our conversation was just needing closure.
Terry's sister Tina is also there on the 10-year anniversary, along with her sister and her niece, who's now 11 years old, the same age Jaycee was when she was kidnapped. Tina tells the OC Register,
I was there at the 10-year date, and I remember my personal memory was standing there watching a pink balloon float up into the sky, looking up at a pink balloon thinking, where are you, Jaycee?
Terry is interviewed by KRCA 3.
I'm scared. I'm scared that this is going to go on forever and ever, and we're never going to have an ending.
Before I die, I want her to know who did this. I didn't want to die someday and never know who had taken her.
There is no mention of the anniversary on Walnut Avenue in Antioch. Alyssa now has a 7-year-old daughter and one who is about to turn 4. She is now 21, and Philip Garrido has lost his sexual interest in her.
There was suspicion whether he was also raping his eldest daughter when she became of age, but nobody really knows.
No, we don't know if that ever happened. But we do know that Philip Garrido at least stopped raping Alyssa after a few years. Instead, she takes on more and more responsibility in the company, Print for Less.
Later stages, she would actually go out and go to some of his customers and liaise with them, or meet them at home in the shed to take their orders. So he gave her more and more freedom, and she ran the business totally.
Yes, Alyssa was even allowed to meet customers. And Philip and Nancy also provided more things for her and the children in the tents in the backyard.
He let them have books because Alyssa wanted to, she wanted to read, but he would only let her have cat books about pussycats. And he brought toys for the children. They're always cats and whatever. So he was very, possessive in that. He didn't want them to ever educate themselves.
No, even though they were given books, everything was strictly controlled by Philip Garrido. And the same applied when they were allowed to leave the house, which they actually did sometimes.
He would take the little one, Starlet, I think, he would take her out to various cinemas and, different fairs and things like that. So he would take them out and, they were very obedient because that was their father who they loved, so they didn't know any better. He had total control over everybody, basically.
But because they were so obedient, Philip became a bit bolder, loosening his strict control. For example, he wasn't as careful about hiding Alyssa and the girls from the neighbors anymore. Helen Boyer, a longtime neighbor, recalls in the documentary Captive for 18 Years.
Just in the front yard, I'd see them.
Two girls, two
young
girls
in the front yard. And then the mother.
You knew Jaycee?
Uh-huh.
You saw Jaycee in the front yard?
Working in the yard with Nancy. They'd be working in the flowers and pulling weeds and stuff.
But Helen didn't find anything unusual about it. She didn't know that Philip was a convicted sex offender, nor that the young woman had been kidnapped. And, of course, Philip didn't completely relinquish his control. Allowing anyone to see the entire backyard was unthinkable. He also drilled Alyssa, Angel, and Starlet on how to behave.
We set up rules, I think, if he's ever caught or whatever, they have to contact a lawyer and work through that, and they can never talk to the police. So he set up these rules that they had to obey if something ever went wrong and he was arrested.
No, they weren't allowed to talk to the police, and if asked, they were to say they were all sisters, even Alyssa. He taught them how to answer other questions, like about school or their lives. They practiced these responses like homework. But despite it being well over 10 years since Alyssa was kidnapped, she hadn't forgotten. You may remember that she kept a secret diary. She still has it, well hidden. And in it, she writes, expressing her conflicting feelings about her life and her captor.
I don't want to hurt him. Sometimes I think my very presence hurts him. So how can I ever tell him that I want to be free? Free to come and go as I please. Free to say I have a family. I will never cause him pain if it's in my power to prevent it. Free.
It was about her life, and the fragments that were released later by police show that she still knew she was Jaycee Dugard, and she had a family, and she just wanted freedom, She just said she wants her freedom in capital letters, That's all we can see, but I think this was how she was trying to keep her head together by making some sense of it with a diary, which she wrote and she hid.
And on tiny little notes, which she also hides meticulously, Alyssa writes down things she wants to do the day she is freed. Meet her mom, go on a hot air balloon ride, learn to sail, ride a horse bareback, and get a driver's license. Ordinary dreams. But for Alyssa at this time, they seem unattainable.
This episode is brought to you by Etsy.
Oh.
Hear that?
Okay. Thank you.
Etsy knows these aren't the sounds of holiday gifting. Well, not the ones you're hoping for. You want squeals of delight. Happy tears.
How did you?
And spontaneously written songs of joy.
I am so happy. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah.
Okay, the song needs a bit of work, but anyway, To get those reactions, make sure everyone on your list feels heard with handmade, handpicked, and designed gifts from small shops on Etsy. Gifts like personalized jewelry, custom artwork, cozy style items, vintage pieces, and home decor to celebrate all of your favorite people and their specific kind of special. For original gifts that say, I get you, Etsy has it.
Building a portfolio with Fidelity Basket Portfolios is kind of like making a sandwich. It's as simple as picking your stocks and ETFs, sort of like your meats and other toppings, and managing it as one big, juicy investment. Now that's pretty good. Learn more at fidelity.com/baskets. Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC. Member NYSE SIPC.
Looking for a great non-alcoholic beer?
Yeah.
Try Athletic Brewing Co.
One that actually
tastes great? It's athletic.
Or that has a
variety of styles? It's athletic.
Or
that's award-winning and seemingly everywhere? It's athletic. Just ask for it.
Okay. Can I get an athletic?
Sure can. The rest of you, go to askforathletic.com and find the #1 non-alcoholic beer brand in the U.S. at a retailer today. Near Beer.
In July 2004, 13 years after she was kidnapped, she writes in her diary,
I feel like I'm sinking. I'm afraid I want control of my life. This is supposed to be my life to do with what I like. But once again, he has taken it away. How many times is he allowed to take it away from me? I'm afraid he doesn't see how the things he say make me a prisoner. Why don't I have control of my life? I feel I can't even be sure my thoughts are my own.
We don't know exactly what incident Alyssa is referring to here, or what kind of freedom Philip is taking away from her, because from the outside, it seems like she hardly has any freedom at all. But something begins to shift in the mid-2000s. The printing business, which had once been so successful, starts to gradually decline.
There'd be spelling mistakes, things were late, and it wasn't like the nice kind of business thing to his customers as it was before. They had to send things back because they spelled names wrong and everything. So that was becoming something of a problem,
Even the neighbors start to notice that Philip is becoming a bit odd. We hear from Helen Boyer again.
Well, he was Wacky Phil.
Wacky Phil.
He was Wacky Phil. He had a funny, I don't know, he was always in a hurry and just different. It was just different, but he was a good neighbor.
No, still no one suspects anything strange about Phil. Both he and Nancy mostly keep to themselves. He tells most people that the children are his nieces, and no one questions it further. Most people don't realize he's a convicted sex offender, even though it would have been easy to check by this time. But then something happens that will change everything.
One of his neighbors next door looked down and she saw a little blonde girl playing with some swings or whatever.
In 2006, a woman named Erica Pratt moves into the house next to Philip, Nancy, and the children. She has looked up who her neighbor is. So when she sees a little girl and her sister playing on a swing in a sex offender's yard, she becomes suspicious. What's more, Erica sees the area hidden from view from the back of the house, the part behind a tall fence and hedge. So she doesn't just see a girl swinging, she sees strange tents and shacks, and it becomes clear that the little girl and her sister seem to be living there.
So she actually called the police and said, there's a little girl, I don't know what she's doing there in this garden.
Yes, Erica simply tells the police that Philip Garrido is a religious fanatic with a sex addiction, and he has small children living in tents in his backyard. And for some reason, the officer who takes the call is not aware that Garrido is a convicted sex offender.
There was a miscommunication, I think, between Nevada and California, so they didn't really know what he'd done in the past. They weren't aware of his history.
But this officer still goes to Walnut Avenue and knocks on the door. He asks Philip Garrido if he has children living in his backyard, but he never goes inside. He never checks the backyard. And, of course, Philip Garrido says no. He doesn't have any children living in his backyard. When Erica Pratt calls back a week later to ask what happened, the police tell her they couldn't enter Philip's house because they didn't have a search warrant. And despite Philip Garrido being on parole, with parole officers regularly visiting him, none of them ever really checked thoroughly.
And in fact, one of them, did go into the backyard and made drawings of the actual compound and everything, but was never, suspicious enough to do anything else further except put it in his report.
What does a parole agent do for his parolee?
Ma'am, you can come in the office and we'll discuss that.
The other
at an appropriate time.
The other
right
guy.
Now I'm doing a search, and I'd really, if you stay in this front room, and I don't have to place you in restraints, because right now I'm searching the house.
This is a video that Nancy Garrido filmed herself of a parole officer visiting their house to check on things. She follows the officer around with a video camera, asking 1,000 questions, all to distract him.
Okay, why is this door locked? Can you move that out and open the door?
The parole officer glances into the yard, but all he sees is a tall hedge at the end and doesn't realize that behind it, there's another garden full of tents and shacks where 2 children and their mother are living. He turns around, and you can sense his irritation with Nancy, as if he gives up and leaves.
I understand. I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do.
I know it.
You got any further questions? Come into the office.
We will
I'll be in there between 8 and 5. All right, and both of you guys can come in.
Oh, he's an arrogant little guy, isn't he?
They're just lazy and they're not asking the right questions. They just look in the garden. They never bother to examine it or anything. And also there's a constant change of parole officers. So he's known as quite difficult. So you get people didn't want to be his parole officer. Somebody else would take over. So there were just so many times that he could have been caught where he got away with it,
But after that police officer came and asked if there were 2 little girls living in his yard, something changed with Philip Garrido. One of his customers, Tim Allen, says that something shifted around 2006. Philip was nearing 60. He had 2 young daughters whom he loved, but were also getting older, and maybe, just maybe, it started to dawn on him that he wouldn't be able to live like this forever.
He gets kind of paranoid after that, that he's not invincible. So, for a while, he would strengthen the rules he had for everybody,
There was also another thing worrying Philip Garrido. In the late 2000s, his elderly mother's health started to decline. Several times, he and Nancy had to call an ambulance when his mother, Pat, had trouble breathing. And the house they lived in belonged to her.
And he was worried that if she dies, he wasn't going to be able to inherit it.
No, because for him to take over the house after she died, he would have to go through a long and complicated process, answering a lot of questions and so on, especially since he was a paroled sex offender. He realized that, if not sooner, it would eventually be discovered that 2 children and a young woman were living in his backyard. People who had never been reported to any authorities. They had never gone to school. They had no social security numbers. They simply didn't exist. At least not officially. So what would happen when Pat Frenzen dies? But most of the time, Philip Garrido managed to push those thoughts away, becoming more and more focused on his church, God's Desire Church, and his black box. By now, it was August 2009, and we are approaching a day that neither Philip Garrido, Nancy, Alyssa, nor the girls will ever forget. A day that will change all of their lives forever. But August 24th starts out as a pretty ordinary day. Philip Garrido drives to the University of California, Berkeley, about 60 miles west of Antioch, with his 2 daughters, Starlet and Angel, to request permission to hold a large event on campus. He has printed new copies of his manifesto, Origins to Schizophrenia Revealed, and also has brochures about his church, God's Desire. Upon arriving at the university, he takes Angel and Starlit to the reception and says he wants to hold a, quote, major event on campus. He is then directed to the campus police special events manager, Lisa Campbell.
This is standard protocol on campus when a group or student organization, non-affiliates want to host an event. UCPD is brought in, so it's not uncommon that happened.
This is Lisa Campbell, speaking at a press conference at the university a few days later. So, Philip presents his manifesto, his book, and starts explaining to Lisa what he wants to do.
And he began to go on, and his thoughts were all over the place, so he wasn't consistent. And he says, well, this is going to be really big. It has something to do with the government, and the FBI and UC Berkeley is involved because we're going to have it here.
But Lisa Campbell has other things to do. Philip hadn't scheduled an appointment. He just showed up. So she suggests, can we just set up a proper meeting for tomorrow?
Which would have been for Tuesday the 25th, and he said, yeah, great, that's excellent. I look forward to sitting down. You're going to really love this. When I tell you about it, it's going to change the world, and I'll see you tomorrow at 2 o'clock.
But Lisa Campbell also wants a meeting soon because something doesn't feel right to her. It's not just that Philip Garrido seems, as she says, unstable, but there's also something about the two little girls he has with him.
The girls appeared to be extremely... They were very quiet. They were very subdued. They were non-responsive. They didn't exhilarate the energy that children of their age would generate or exhilarate. They weren't in school. It was 1 o'clock. School has started in this region, so they weren't in school. So that was one of the things that sort of caught my attention. At that point, my concern was about the kids, and so I wanted to have an opportunity to get a little better look at them and to have a better assessment of what was happening there.
Yes, the children were so quiet, so still, Lisa thought. And they weren't in school. No, something felt off. So Lisa Campbell felt she needed to see them again. The next day, when she met her colleague Allie Jacobs, a police officer at Berkeley, she told her about the meeting, the man, and the two children, and the uneasy feeling she had. Here we hear Allie Jacobs from the same press conference at UC Berkeley.
So I said, well, let's do a records check on his name and see what kind of person we're dealing with. If it was enough that hinked her up, it was worth, seeing, what his history was.
So Allie called and checked his name.
And they informed me that he was on parole, federal parole for kidnapping and rape, and he was also a sex registrant. And once they told me that, my kind of red flags went up because she had mentioned something about 2 young kids and that she had mentioned these 2 kids didn't seem right. So I thought, well, this could be something a little bit more than we bargained for.
A kidnapper and sex offender coming in for a meeting was not exactly what Lisa and Allie had expected. But they decided to both meet with him to see what they could figure out together. At the time, they didn't want to make too big of a deal out of the fact that there were 2 of them.
We didn't really know what we had. We didn't want to alert him that we were looking at him for anything criminal. We just keep it really mellow and see what we have going on.
There was nothing in the paperwork that said that he couldn't be around children.
This is Lisa Campbell interviewed on NBC Today.
But I was definitely concerned at that point.
So Philip comes in and he brings his 2 children with him. The younger one sits on a chair in front of Allie's desk, and the older one stands next to her father. Philip takes out his book, Origins to Schizophrenia Revealed, and starts talking again. Here's Allie Jacobs.
It was really hard to understand what he was talking about. I couldn't really follow most of what he was saying. Lisa kept saying, how can we help you, sir? How can special events help you? Trying to get him back on track. And he says, this is going to be huge. I'm so glad that you guys are partaking in this. This is God's desire. And then he threw out, 33 years ago, I was arrested for kidnapping and rape. And I kind of... Okay, I knew that, but I just didn't think he would throw that out there, especially in front of these young girls.
No, neither Lisa nor Allie expected Philip Garrido to sit there and admit to his crimes. But he seemed unfazed and just continued saying, but now I'm cured, and I found God, and so on. But Allie was still confused about why he brought these 2 girls with him, so she simply asked,
who are these 2 young ladies? And he said, oh, these are my daughters.
And Allie asked how old they were and what grades they were in. They answered 4th and 9th, and Lisa asked if they were in school.
They both just, like robots, were homeschooled.
That was the feeling throughout, says Allie Jacobs. Everything they said seemed rehearsed. But there was something else, too.
The one thing to point out that we noticed right away is the coloring of these two little girls. They were extremely pale. In comparison to Philip, they were extremely, extremely pale, bright blue eyes, just like him. I mean, just penetratingly blue eyes. I just got a weird, uneasy feeling.
At New Balance, we believe if you run, you're a runner, however you choose to do it. Because when you're not worried about doing things the right way, you're free to discover your way. And that's what running's all about. Run your way at newbalance.com/running.
Black Friday football on Prime is back this week. The Raiders and the Chiefs.
Into the end zone. Unbelievable catch.
An old school rivalry for a new game day.
Firing downfield hard.
Stream for free only on Prime.
Great move.
Black Friday football. Raiders versus Chiefs. Kickoff at 3 p.m. Eastern. Pre-game at 1:30 p.m. Friday only on Prime. Restrictions apply. See Amazon.com/watch Black Friday football for details.
This episode is brought to you by Vonage. Have you figured out how to build more engaging customer and employee experiences while growing your bottom line? It's easier than you think. Vonage Fusion brings together your contact center, business communications, and CRM to streamline internal collaboration and improve overall customer experience. Learn more about the benefits of customer and employee communications in perfect harmony at Vonage.com.
But both Allie and Lisa are police officers, and you can't act on a strange feeling. It's not a crime to have children who are very pale. It's also not a crime to homeschool your children. About 5% of the U.S. population does that. So they had to look for something else. And then Allie noticed that the younger girl had a small mark on her eye.
So I asked her, what happened to your eye? She immediately replied with this very rehearsed response. It's a birth defect, it's inoperable, I'll have it for the rest of my life. And I was kind of taken back by that response, because if I was a little girl and I had this thing on my face and someone asked me about it, I would probably be a little embarrassed. But she just didn't, and she just went and stopped smiling.
Exactly. That was another thing. The younger daughter kept smiling the whole time. And Allie wasn't just a police officer.
I'm a mother, I have 2 young sons, and this is when my police mode turned into my mother mode, and I think the two really played key here with police intuition and mother's intuition. I wasn't so much focused on him. I'm kind of used to the rantings and ravings of people doing the job that I do. I was more focused on them. What's going on with them? What can I do to help them?
Because it was the mother in her that deeply felt something was wrong. Definitely wrong. But how could they address it? So Allie and Lisa decided to ask more questions about homeschooling and family life.
Because now I'm back into police mode, and what do I have? What kind of crimes do I have? What can I do? So I asked them, so you're homeschooled? And I asked Mr. Guerrero, I was like, who do you teach? Does your wife? And he says, well, my wife teaches, and I help with that. And then the younger daughter said, and we have an older sister that lives with us too. She's 28, and the older sibling said, without missing a beat, 29, and went right back up to her dad, and seemed kind of bothered that was even mentioned.
So there's a mother at home and another sister, Allie and Lisa thought. But is there any crime? The man with the 2 children is clearly disturbed, and the children are obviously different from other kids, but there's nothing concrete.
I'm searching the younger daughter, I'm searching her face for any kind of sign, and I'm just looking at her like, help me, or some kind of sign that maybe she couldn't talk, but that she could give me with her facial expression, anything, and I wasn't reading anything from these kids.
So there was nothing, at that point, that Lisa and Allie could do to detain Philip Garrido and his daughters. They had no idea what was happening, or had been happening, on Walnut Avenue for years. And how could they know? So they said, thank you, you have 2 wonderful daughters, goodbye. And Philip Garrido walked out. And that could have been the end of it. Like so many other times in Philip Garrido's life, he slips through the cracks, like an eel in a net. But Allie and Lisa couldn't shake the manic man and his robotic children.
We just were talking about something's up with those girls. Something's going on with those girls. We don't know what. We don't know what kind of activities happening at home. I've got no proof. As a cop, you need proof to act. I was very frustrated. And so I told Lisa, the only thing I can do right now is call his probation officer, talk to him. Maybe this is just normal behavior that they're already aware of. And I'm just taking this out of context.
So Allie Jacobs calls the parole officer responsible for Philip Garrido, but he didn't answer. So she left a voicemail.
He brought all his literature. He seems like he's disturbed. I don't know if that's normal behavior for him. He brought his 2 daughters with him. They seemed a little out of touch with reality and very robotic, and my main concern was for them. If you could give me a call back, I would appreciate either a visit, maybe you could check in with you, or at least a home visit or something to check on these little girls. And that, I thought, was going to be the end of it.
But this wasn't the end of the story. Not for Allie Jacobs and Lisa Campbell, and not for Philip Garrido either. Because the parole officer called back and asked Allie Jacobs to explain what happened again. When she mentioned that Philip had brought his daughters, the parole officer, whose name was Edward Santos, stopped her and said,
He says he doesn't have any daughters. My stomach just sank. I said, well, he had 2 daughters with him that day. They had his blue eyes. They looked a little like him. They were calling him daddy. I had no reason not to believe that they weren't his daughters. In fact, they referenced an older sister at home. So he had daughters. And he said, well, I think that he had some granddaughters, but I'm not sure. Let me double check on that. What I'll do is I'll call him into the office, and I'll meet with him, and I'll just tell him a condition of parole. He's not allowed to come back on your campus. Great. That's fine with me. My job is done.
Yes, Allie Jacobs' job was done. But she had no idea that she had just played a part in solving one of the most difficult kidnapping cases in U.S. history. And neither did Edward Santos when he went to see Philip Garrido, mostly for a routine check. He later explained to KCRA3.
I asked him about the 2 little girls. Where are they? He said, oh, they're gone. They're gone. Their dad picked them up.
They're not mine. They're my brother Ron's daughters. I'm just looking after them for him.
But Edward Santos wasn't satisfied with that, as he told KCRA3.
I go, this isn't over, okay? I need to speak to those 2 girls' parents. I want to make sure that those parents know that you're taking them places, and that they know that they're aware that you're a 290 sex offender, parolee on parole. So tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, I want you in my office and those 2 little girls and a parent.
And just as Edward Santos asked, Philip Garrido showed up the next morning at the police station. He brought the 2 girls just as he had promised, but not the supposed parents. Instead, he brought another girl who appeared to be around 20 years old, according to Edward Santos. Philip also brought his wife, Nancy Garrido. We hear from author John Glatt again.
So they take them into different rooms and they give different stories, you know.
Yes, Edward Santos led Nancy and the 3 girls into a room, and Philip waited outside.
And I looked over at Nancy and I said, listen, Nancy, I asked Philip to bring the parents of these girls here today. He didn't do that. If I don't speak with the parents of these girls, they're not leaving this office today. Immediately, Jaycee spoke up. She looked at me and she said, I'm the mom. I'm their mother. And I looked at her and I said, you're the mom? And she kind of laughed and smiled and she said, yeah, I get that look all the time. I look really young, but really I'm 29.
Edward Santos was now thoroughly puzzled. Was this young woman really the mother of the children? He went outside to Philip, who continued to insist that Alyssa and the girls were his nieces, the daughters of his brother. Or, cryptically, he first said, the father of the girls is my mother's son. But when asked directly if the father was his brother, he said yes.
So there's 2 varying stories, so the police are very suspicious.
Yes, now Edward Santos began to wonder what's really going on. He went back to Alyssa and said, "Philip says you're his sisters. Why does he say that?" At first, Alyssa didn't want to answer, but then she became regretful and said that Philip was just trying to protect her. She continued,
"I'm sorry I lied to you, but I'll tell you what's going on." Without hesitation or anything, she says, I used to live in the state of Utah, and I lived in an abusive relationship with my husband. And I escaped that relationship with my daughters. He was going to kill me and my daughters.
Then she said, "You understand why I'm so careful about what I say to strangers, right?" Edward Santos assured her that anything she said to him was confidential, but she just shook her head and said she could never take that risk. In the next episode, what no one thought would happen does happen.
A California kidnapping case has come to an astonishing end. Police believe they have the victim, who was snatched from the street 18 years ago as a young girl.
Katie Calloway sees something shocking on TV.
Oh my God, I started screaming for my husband to come downstairs quick. This is the man that kidnapped me. Look what he's done.
And an unlikely reunion.
She knew me, and she came forward right away and I threw it was a meeting of the middles, and together we hugged, and she said, "Auntie Tina," she absolutely knew who I was.
You've been listening to the 5th episode of Girl Missing, a series about the kidnapping of Jaycee Dugard. The producer is Tove Freeman Leffler. I'm Jonathan Rollins. Sound design and mixing by Jens Nielsen and Thomas Rajnai, who are also executive producers. And don't forget to follow Crime by PodLit so you know when the next episode is released. And of course, to see all the other series we've done. The sound clips in this chapter come from the University of Berkeley, KCRA, ABC World News, NBC, Captive for 18 Years, Orange County Register, CBS, and ABC. Thank you for listening.